Hey guys, this is Jack from FPV Academy, and in this video we are going to teach you how to build your FPV quadcopter. So this isn't just any quadcopter that you are going to be building. This isn't a one shoe fits all kind of solution. This video is specifically made for the FPV Academy Multi-Purpose FPV Quad. It is a very high-end quad. This quad is really great. It has all the latest hardware, and congratulations on purchasing one. I'm just really excited that you guys did go with the option of purchasing one of these. There's so many other options on the market, but believe me when I tell you that once you've built this thing, once you've flown it, you are really going to enjoy it. So hopefully this video is set up in a really easy to understand and follow manner. If you do have any questions, then let me know in the comment section below and I will get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you guys so much for watching this, and just enjoy your build. Okay, so before we start with this build, let's just go over all the names of everything that we are going to be using, just so you are familiar with what they are called. So this right over here is the frame. This is the main plate. That's very straightforward. Moving on, we have the top plate, and then also the FPV camera. Then we have the VTX and the antenna. Then we have the propellers. We also have the motors. These are the ESCs. This right over here is the Lux V2 flight controller. This is the power distribution board and on-screen display in one. And this is the XT60 pigtail. So now that you know what all the different parts are called, let's get right into the build. Alright, so for this first step, we're going to be attaching the FPV camera to the frame. So for this, we're going to be using everything that's on screen. You also need the hex Allen key, and then also just a very small screwdriver. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to make sure that your top plate already has these standoffs connected to them, as well as this back plate that is already connected. Make sure that this piece that sticks out is on the left though. You don't want it on the right, it has to be on the left for the VTX to fit later down the line. So once you have this ready, you then want to assemble this piece right over here, and this is where the camera gets mounted. It's very easy. You just attach it using the screws and one standoff, and then you have that ready to go. Now on this over here, you'll see that there's two holes. There's a hole over there, and then on the bottom one there's another hole, and that is where the Lumineer camera gets connected to. So once you have that all set up, you want these to be pointing to the back, pointing that way, and the camera pointing to the front. So then you can just play around with it until this camera goes into those holes. So let me just speed past this point until I have that ready. There we go. Now the camera is inside its housing. So it's quite tight. What you do want to do is, along with the camera in the box, you would have found two little screws. These two screws that I put right over there, those screws you will be using to attach the camera to this plate, just to make sure that everything is tightly in place. But you only want to do that once this camera has been fitted into its top plate. So the next thing you want to do is just very easily slide this camera into the top plate. Just make sure that it sits nice and flush against the plate. Everything should very easily just slide into position. So that's the one side, and that's the other side, and it's in position. So everything is good to go there. The only last thing to do is, as I just said, these two screws, you're going to be using this screwdriver to just tighten those screws really tightly to make sure that the camera doesn't move in flight, the camera angle. And then if you want to adjust your camera angle, it's very easily as well. If you're going to be starting out, you want your camera angle to be really low. So both screws are in now. You're probably going to be flying on a camera angle such as that. Let me just put it in a way where you can see. You're going to fly on a camera angle very close to that. And then when you get more advanced, you can very easily just undo these screws, and then let me just push it really hard. You can move that camera up the angle a little bit more, and then that's the camera angle. So then finally is this last little piece of plate that's left over, that just easily attaches onto the back here, and I only really do that once the entire build is done, because I might want to get into there to be able to access that piece of Molex connector. So I'm going to keep this all for now, and then once you have that ready, you're ready to go to the next step. Now for the next step, we are going to be attaching the Maytag Hub OSD PDB to the board and also solder on all the little pieces of solder. We're going to tin this board so that we are able to solder all the ESCs and the XT60 pigtail, all of that really nicely. So to do this, I'm just going to zoom in for us so we have a little bit closer view of this process. Okay, so on the frame, you'll see that there's a little thing on the back here. That is the back side of the frame. And then this is the back side of the Maytag Hub OSD, so that has to be pointing to the back. So what you want to do is, with your purchase of the QAV X frame, you did get a whole bunch of these little things with it as well. What I did include into this, which is my personal own, are these rubber O-rings. Now, these do not come in the kit. You don't need them to build this, but I always like to use rubber O-rings, but I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So the first thing you want to do is you want to just put in the screws all under these four. Let me focus that for us before I carry on. There we go, that's nicely focused. So you want to put the screws through the bottom just like that on all four of them. Now this might be a tricky scenario to get all four of them in without one of them falling out. So just play around with it until you are able to get all four of them through the holes without them not falling out. You might actually want to grab onto it like that so it doesn't fall back. So then there we go, that's all four of them through. So that's our four screws. So let's focus back to the bottom again. There we go. Then once we have that, this is where I like to use the rubber O-rings. You do get the spacers included with your kit, so you don't need to use these rubber O-rings, just use the spacers that were included. And then that is just to make sure that this board doesn't touch the carbon fiber. You want it to be a little bit off of the ground because there are some traces and things, as you can see on the bottom, and you don't want that touching the board because carbon fiber actually does conduct the electricity, so you don't want it to be touching the board. And then once we have it like that, it goes on top of it right there. And then we can take these smaller standoffs and then start screwing them onto each little corner. And then that is how we have our Maytag Hub OSD installed. So I'm just going to speed past this part until I'm done screwing these on. Alright, so that's all of them in place. These we're going to be using a little bit later, so I'll move them out of the way. And then now that we have this all ready to go, I'm going to switch on my soldering iron. I should have done this a little while ago, but here's my soldering iron. And we are going to be tinning these little pads. So the reason why we tin the pads are when you attach the wire to it, you need to have solder on the pad already so that solder can melt and then infuse with the wire. So once my soldering iron is hot, you want to put it on. If you have an adjustable soldering iron, you want it to be at about 370 degrees Celsius. I'm not sure what that is in Fahrenheit, but 370 is a good temperature to have this going. So let's just test to see if it's hot enough yet. And we can see that it is melting the solder right there by it giving a piece of smoke. So if you haven't soldered before, there are a bunch of videos online that I would recommend watching if you haven't soldered before. It does teach you exactly everything that you need to know to solder. So let's get right into the first pads. So the first one that you want to do is this pad right over here. And it doesn't really matter where you start, just as long as you get all these pads on the corners. That is for your ESCs. So just keep tinning all these pads, just more or less that amount. You don't want it to be too much. And then also another point that you do want to take into consideration is that these little standoffs that you used, these ones, are made out of nylon, so they are plastic, and that means that they can melt. So you want to make sure that you don't touch that with your soldering iron because you are going to be melting them. So moving on, this is the next one we want to do. I'll just speed up through them as I'm doing it, and then just remember which ones I am doing to just do those exact same ones. So moving on. Alright, so then we did all the corner ones now, that is for all the ESCs. And then these ones that you see over here, those are the ones that we'll be using for the on-screen display, which is the biggest feature of this Maytag Hub OSD. So these all need to be tinned as well. So just put some solder on them just like that. And then once you're done with that, then we need to solder another two, which will allow us to power our flight controller, and that is this 12 volt and the ground pad right over there. So on the back, we're going to be tinning that one and that one. That's what we're going to use to power our flight controller. Then the biggest thing with this Maytag Hub OSD is that it does come with this XT60 connector, but that is made to be standing up just like that. And the problem is I can't wrap my cable around from my battery to plug in there because it's not long enough. So to counter that, we are going to be using the XT60 pigtail that I have right over here that I showed you guys earlier, and that is then attached to there so that it has a little bit of extra reach to the back so that we can plug in our battery really easily. But to do that though, we need to fill this. You can see there's two big holes there. We need to fill both of those holes with solder. So this is quite tricky. You just want to heat that up and add a little bit of solder around it in a circle, and then just keep going in a circle like that until the whole thing is filled up with solder. So I'm just going to speed past this because it does take quite a while, but just keep filling it up until it is filled with the solder. Before I do speed it up though, one little note is that you do want to make sure that the solder doesn't run through to your carbon fiber. Like I said, carbon fiber does conduct electricity, and if that solder is touching the carbon fiber, it is going to be conducting that electricity. So you don't want that to happen. Now, as you can see, they are filled up there, and that's exactly what you want to do. But then before we carry on though, just look through the bottom and just make sure, if you keep it on the side like that, let me just focus here so you can see what I'm meaning. Just if you hold it like that, you want to make sure that there's no solder that's coming through there. If there is, you're going to have to just undo the whole thing and then just take that off to make sure there's no solder anymore. But then let's just refocus. There we go. Then once you have it covered up, you want to make sure that there's a little bit of a bump of solder. So just add a tiny bit more so that we have them the same as the others. So it's almost like a big solder pad that you made. And there we go. That is how you solder on those holes, and then that is ready to attach this next piece of XT60. So for the XT60, this is too long. We don't want to have it so long. So we're going to have to cut this XT60 a little bit shorter. You want to cut it about 1 inch away from the back side. So maybe 1 1/4 inch, a little bit longer, more or less that length. Okay, so you're going to cut that off right there. So this jumped out of the screen now, but here it is. So this is our XT60, and then we're going to want to solder that on there. But first we need to cut off the silicon sleeving so that it makes space for us to be able to tin the wire and then solder that wire onto the XT60. So once you have both of those off and these wires are exposed, let me move this out of the way a little bit. Let me grab this very wonderful piece of what we call in South Africa press stick. I don't know if you guys get it in the US, but just anything that allows you to keep that in place. See, it won't move now. You do get helping hands and a whole bunch of other things, but I prefer to just use this. It's very easy. Anything to just hold it in place, because this is going to get hot very, very quickly. So what you want to do then is you want to tin these exposed wires, because you can't just solder it directly onto there. These wires first need to have its own solder onto it as well, so that that solder can then get infused with the other solder that is on the pads already. So I'm just going to speed past how I am tinning these. As you can see, I'm just heating it up, adding solder onto it until the whole thing is covered nicely in solder. Alright, so now that these are soldered, I can move all of this out of the way, and this can then get soldered right onto the board. So you see the flat side of the XT60, it's got a flat side and a round side. The flat side is the positive side, and as you can see, that is the positive side on this board. So let me turn it more or less in this direction, And then now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab these tweezers to hold this cable in place, because again this cable is going to get really hot. I don't want to burn myself. And then we are going to start soldering this onto here. Now when doing this, it's really important to have a very high quality soldering iron, because the wire for this XT60 is very, very thick. And because this wire is so thick, it takes a very long time for it to melt the solder again. And if you don't have a soldering iron that is rated a high wattage, then it's going to be really difficult for you to solder this and melt all the solder that you need. And there we go. So now that is attached to your power distribution board. So the reason we want that is, you see how this moves on the back here? That is exactly what you want to achieve, because if you use this other XT60, like I said, it's not long enough, and if it was soldered on directly in a crash, there's a good chance that you will break your board. But this way, having this little piece that moves around like that makes it a lot stronger and sturdier to be able to do that. Alright, so now that we have this in place, the next thing we want to attach is the capacitor, which did come with your Maytag Hub OSD, and that is right this over here. So the capacitor is used on your Maytag Hub OSD because if you don't use this, the values that is displayed on your on-screen display when flying FPV sometimes goes off the charts. It's not very accurate, and this capacitor just helps to make it a little bit accurate. So you want to cut this a little bit shorter. That is too long. We're not going to be needing that. So I'm just going to cut that off, and then once that's cut off, you want to grab 2 pieces of wire. If you don't have these 2 pieces of wire, you can just grab some from your motors, because we're going to be cutting this shorter. So if you have a motor lying around, you can just cut about 1 inch from it, just like that. You can cut it off more or less that distance from the motor, and then you can use those 2 wires for this next step. So once you have those 2 pieces of wire, we are then going to attach this wire to the capacitor, and then attach the capacitor to the Maytag Hub OSD. So the first thing we're going to do is just expose the wires of this piece of silicon that I have here. Take the silicon off so that you expose those wires, and then we're going to tin this and attach it to the capacitors. Doesn't matter which color goes where, doesn't really matter, but you're just going to attach it just like that using solder. So I'm just going to fast forward past this so you guys can see what I'm doing. Well, the same as with the others, we are tinning these wires, and by tinning it, it means that we are able to attach it now. I also tinned the capacitor, so then now that the capacitor is tinned and these wires are tinned, I am now going to solder both of these together so that they are connected. So very easily, just like that. That's all you need. That attached this wire to the capacitor, and now for the next one, both of them have solder on. Just let it melt, let it dry. And then that's all that you need to do to attach this together. Alright, so now both of them are done, we are going to take a piece of heat shrink, because this could sometimes bend and touch each other, and then it's going to short out, and we don't want that. So I'm just going to cut a very small piece of heat shrink, just like that, and another small piece of heat shrink, just like that. Move this out of the way, slip this heat shrink over the back of both of them, and then that covers up what I did over there, and now even if it does move, it won't do anything. So you can just take your soldering iron, just rub it over it like that. The heat will make it shrink, which is why it's called heat shrink, and then that just makes sure that it's a lot safer. So once we have that done, we are now going to connect this capacitor to the battery source. So on the capacitor, you'll see that the one side is white and the other side there's nothing. The white side, as you can see, there is a negative on it. So that gets connected to the negative side, which is this right over there. So this capacitor is going to go on the back just like that. And then you see where it kind of sits on the back of the XT60. That's what you want to do, is just connect it to the back of the XT60 like that. We're going to take some tape and wrap it around, but then you see that the cable is too long. We're going to cut this cable now. The wire, I meant wire, not cable. What am I talking about? Okay, cutting through the wire. Wire is off, and then expose these little pieces of wire. Take the silicon off You do get a tool to do this, but the smaller ones, it is very easy to just use your hand. And then same thing again. Every time we want to attach a piece of wire, we need to tin it. So again, taking this Wonder glue, it's called Press Stick, which is quite interesting. I'm surprised I haven't seen that in the US before, but oh, I'm off screen. Okay, there we go, that's what we need. So then now I'm going to tin this, just like that, and then this one, tin it. You can use a little bit more to make sure that they are both tinned really nicely. So both of them have been tinned now, and like I said, we can take that off. The white is the negative, so make sure that it goes on the negative. And then to keep this in place again, I am going to use my tweezer because this is going to get really, really hot. So let me just make sure it is on screen. There we go. And then I'm going to grab this and then solder it onto the battery leads. Just make sure when you do solder onto the batteries like this, the battery leads, you have to make sure that the actual solder of the battery lead is melting, not just the solder from the piece that you tinned on this wire, because if that is the case, then it doesn't make a good enough joint and there's a good chance that it is going to come loose. So now for the next one. Okay, just keep it there for a while until you see that the solder is melting. There we go. So now the capacitor is connected, and once we have the capacitor connected with this, we can actually wrap this up. So I just use normal electrical tape for this part. Let me just find the end. We can grab the electrical tape and then we can start wrapping away. So to make it a little bit easier, I will start at the bottom, grab it like this, take it around. So the electrical tape is just there to help make it look a little bit cleaner, a little bit nicer. There we go. And I can start wrapping. All right, and that's it. So cut this piece off. Okay, pull it tightly. And that's it. So this is our XT60 connector, and that is what it should look like at the end. So that then now gives you power. And while I'm at it, I can actually plug it in. You can plug this in, it'll make some lights. Let me grab a battery. So I'm grabbing this battery, plugging it in just to show you guys, and voila, we have power. So everything looks good. This is what it should look like if everything is done right. And if you see that, we can move on to the next step. Alright, so for the next step, we are going to attach the ESCs to the frame. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to make sure that this cable is long enough to fit in between the motor, which is going to go on the edge over here, and to the power source, which is your power distribution board, which we did right over there. So you want to find the right distance for this ESC. So you want to play around with it. You want to leave at least about 3/4 of an inch to an inch on the side here. And also you don't want this to be too short. So just find a nice balance. This should be fine, more or less. Let me show that in the middle. That should be a good place to start. So once you have that distance, it's important to know that this is the negative, the black, and this is the positive. But then if you look on the Maytech Hub OSD, you'll see that this is the negative and that's the positive. So this is actually the wrong way around. So that one needs to go there, the red, and this one needs to go on the other side over there. So these cables are going to crisscross over the middle, but that's totally fine. We just need to make sure that we cut it long enough when we do cut it shorter. So for that, what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to take the one cable, move this right out of the way, measure it, make sure that it's the right length. There we go, more or less the same, which is right over there, and then just cut that off. And then once we have the one distance, the one length, we can just make sure that the other one is more or less the same length. And we can just cut off that red one. So once we have the right length of wire for our ESCs, we can then take off the silicon and expose the wires so that we are able to tin them. So once these wires are exposed, we are now going to tin them like any other wire which we are going to be soldering. So again, just sticking that on the table very easily. Move this a little bit more into the center of the screen so you guys can see what I'm doing. Move that a bit out of the way. Grab my soldering iron and then some more solder, roll that off, and then we're good to go. So soldering again, just heat up these wires, dab a little bit on it, and tin this wire so that we are able to attach it to the power distribution board. So this is the power that gets delivered to the ESC, and it's really important to have these because if you don't solder these onto the power distribution board, then you're not going to have power to your ESCs, and if you don't have power to your ESCs, you don't have power to your motors, and then your quad's not going to work. So these are very important wires which we are going to be soldering on right now. So once you have these tinned really nicely, just like that, we can then go ahead and attach it. That's actually really easy too. Let me grab this, take that off. Just make sure there's no residue left over. Move this to the center of the screen. And then again, I'm going to grab my tweezers because this gets really hot. And then I am going to solder it on. Now, because I soldered it onto this board quite a while ago, the solder has cooled down. So to make sure that it heats up a little bit faster, I'm just going to melt it quickly. It's a little trick that I know. There we go, it's melted. That means it's heated up again nicely now. And then that should make it a little bit easier to solder this onto it. Like I said before though, you want to be careful not to touch these nylon standoffs on the side because that will melt your nylon standoff because it's very hot. Once we have that in place, you'll see it wraps around really nicely, more or less like that. And then I'm just going to grab this cable, bring it around, and then solder that onto the next one. So there we go. And there we go. That is now soldered onto your power distribution board. So this is what it will look like in the end. And then we are basically going to do the exact same for all four of the others. So I'm just going to skip out this part because it's exactly the same as I just explained, but you're going to do the same just for all the other ones, and I'm going to come back right when I'm done with that, and then we can take it on to the next step. So just continue doing this until you are done with all four of them. Alright, so this is what it will look like once you are done soldering on all of your ESCs. So let's just have a closer look at this. Let me get this in focus for you guys just to show you what is happening. And that is what you are seeing right there. All of them are soldered on nicely and we're good to go. So moving on to the next step, let me zoom out a little bit and get that back in focus. The next thing we want to do is put on the motors. So before we get into that though, let's grab this piece of tape, electrical tape, and just make sure that these ESCs aren't moving anywhere. So it doesn't matter where you do it, just grab it, tape it around once so that they don't move up and down. And then you just want to make sure you do that with all of the ESCs. So it doesn't have to be neat right now. We are going to be taking that off at a later stage. This is just for now so that they are kept in place when you are going to be doing your motors. So I'm just going to fast forward past this. Alright, so this is what it's going to look like. You'll see that these black and white cables are all over the place, and they are very long, the 35 amp ones. Just put them to the one side like this, just out of the way a little bit, because we are now going to be working mostly on the motor. So let's zoom out a little bit more. Alright, so with that said, the next thing we want to do is attach all your motors to the frame. So it's very easy to do this. You just grab the screws that you got with your motors, turn it around, make sure that this cable is pointing towards your ESC because that's where you're going to be doing it, and then you can put that through and start screwing all of these on. Again, this does take quite a while to do, but I'm just going to fast forward past this so that you guys don't have to really see me do it very slowly. Alright, so that's all 4 of the motors attached, and then now what we're going to do is we are going to solder the motors onto the ESCs, because that is what supplies the power to the motors. So this is a very easy next step. Basically what you're going to do here is, let me zoom in for you guys. Wrong way. Yeah, it's shaking a little bit. Just stop it shaking, just refocus. Okay, so the next thing we are going to do is, let me grab a motor. Oh, this one is fine here. You see how there are 3 cables for the motors, 1, 2, 3, and then they are way too long. We don't need them to be that long. We want it to be about 1 inch away from the motor. So we are then going to just cut it off right there. I know you're probably thinking, oh, I don't want to cut my motor cables. It's fine. It's really not such a big thing. And then you are left with 3 really small ones. So then exactly the same as before. Now you will see that they are all in sequence. You'll see that there's 1, 2, 3, and then 1, 2, 3 pads. We are going to strip this cable, the wire, so that it exposes the wires on the inside. And then once those are stripped, we are going to tin all 3 of these. So let's give those a really quick tin, and then once all 3 of these are tinned, I'm just going to move them, bend them out of the way quite a bit, so you guys can see what I'm doing here. We are going to put some solder on the solder pads, because there's no solder on them at the moment, and there's no way that we can put the wire on it yet if there is no solder on it. So we are just adding some solder onto this. Make sure that it flows. You just have to wait for it to warm up nicely, and the solder will just drop onto it just like that, and that's perfect. That's exactly what we want to be able to attach these wires. Okay, waiting for this one. There we go. The next one, which is also the last one. Come on, there we go. Now you can see there are 3 blobs of solder on the solder pads, and now I'm going to grab my little tweezers, and with these tweezers I'm going to hold this cable in place and then just start soldering them all onto each other. So very easily, there we go, that's one, and then the next one is exactly the same. There we go, that's the second one, and then the final one. So the final one, 1, 2, 3, there we go, and that's all 3 of the cables soldered onto the ESC. So this motor is now connected, and we have to do exactly the same for all 4 the other motors. So I'm just going to skip past this because it's exactly the same. Just do that, and then when you're done with that, you can carry on to the next step. Alright, and that's how we have all 4 of the motors attached. 1, 2, 3, and 4. So all 3 of the motors, all 4 of the motors are now attached, and we are left with what we see on screen here. So let me zoom out to just show you guys a bigger view of it. So this is what we now have left. And so the next thing we want to do is, remember we tied these ESCs down and we didn't do such a great job, but that was just a very quick fix. So now that the ESCs are actually on, we can really tie them down really nicely. That is the position that they are going to stay in. So when you do take this tape off though, there is a very good chance that you might pull off the piece of sticker that says Lumineer 35 amp ESC. This sticker might come off. If that does happen, that is totally fine. It's just a sticker. It does make it look nice, but it's no biggie if it does come off. So just take all of this tape off, then re-tape it down the entire ESC really nicely. I'm going to speed past here until I've taken all the tape off, and then just show you guys how to tape down one ESC really nicely. Alright, so all 4 ESCs are now undone. I'm going to grab my electrical tape again, and then let's show you how to do this really nicely. So something really important to remember, let me just take these white cables out of the way, is on the front here, you'll see that there are a hole over there and another one over there, and that is where this piece goes in. So that goes in over there, and that one goes in over there. And then what that does is that just holds it in place. So you have to make sure that there's enough space by this cable. So you just want to make sure that when you do tie down this ESC, that is shoved back all the way so that there is space for that piece of carbon fiber to go there. So once that is pushed away, you want to push this more or less in the middle, and then just push all these cables down. It doesn't have to be perfect. These cables are very, very flexible. Just make sure that all the cables are down nicely, and then we can start tying this ESC down. So you want to start by the back, and then just really tightly roll this around, and just like that we can tie this down as neatly as we can so that it looks really nice. And then when you get to the end, you can just tie it down really nicely, and that is what your finished arm will look like. There's nothing more that we need to do there. Everything is in place and in position and beautiful. So just keep doing this for the next 4, and then I'm just going to skip past this so you guys don't have to watch me doing this tediously. Alright, so now that we have all the ESCs and the motors in place, we are ready to carry on with the next step. And the next step is connecting the flight controller. So for this, we are first going to be tinning all the pads that we will be using on the flight controller, and then we will be carrying on with the next step. So I can move this out of the way. We are not going to need that right now. I can stick this onto my piece of Wonder Glue. Let's start with the bottom. That should be a good place to start. And then I can zoom this in all the way to show you guys exactly what we are going to be doing. So this is the flight controller. So what we want to do first is tin all the pads that we are going to use. And on the bottom side of the flight controller, this is the pads that we will be using. So this G over here, that is the ground for the 12-volt power supply, which will be coming from the Maytag Hub OSD. And then this is the power source for the 12-volt. So those two are the only ones that we are going to be using. Now, something really important to remember though, is you see that there's a 5 and a 3 here at the bottom. And what that is, that depends on which what's it called, the receiver for your radio that you're going to be using. So if you're going to be using a FreeSky radio, if you have a Tyrannus, if you use that in your package, then you will be bridging the 5 and the middle one. And if you're going to be using a Spectrum radio, you're going to be using bridging the 3 and the middle one. And that's just for the voltage for your receiver. This has to be done, otherwise your receiver is not going to work. I will personally be using the 5 because I'm going to have a FreeSky Tyrannus for that I'm going to be flying the squad on, but I used a little bit too much, so let's just suck that solder right off there and just redo this again and just make sure that it's neatly done and that it's not touching the 3. And that's it. Those are the only 2 pads that we are going to be doing on the bottom. We don't need any more, and then we can flip it around. So then on the top, what we will be doing is we are going to be soldering the number 1 ESC ground, which is the black cable on the ESCs, you know, those ones that got in the way the whole time. and then the number 2 ground and the number 2 signal. So those ones, then the number 3 ground and the number 3 signal. There we go. And the last final number 4 ground and the number 4 signal. Now, the other things that we need to solder on here is we need our radio receiver, and that's going to go over there, the signal, that's the 5 volt, and that's the ground for our radio receiver. And those are all the pads that we need to tin on this flight controller. And once we have that done, we are good to go. We can actually attach this to our quadcopter. So let me bring in our quad over here again, the masterpiece that we have been working on. Before we carry on though, all these white cables, you see how they are winded up? They can get winded up a little bit more. So actually turn this nicely, wind them up more so that they aren't as loose when you are going to be connecting them. And it does just make the build a little bit nicer, looks nice. And you know that they are a little bit more secure. No cables are going to be flapping around a lot. So I'm just going to speed past this until I'm done with all of these. And there we go. All 4 of them have been twisted. So before we carry on with those though, let's just take those out of the way. We now need to attach the flight controller to the board. So what we're going to do again is these cables that we cut off earlier, I am going to use 2 of these. Let me just cut off these bullet connectors because we won't be using them. So just cut those off, move this out of the way, and then we're left with these 2 cables. So the same as before, now we're going to have to strip both sides so that we can tin both sides. So that's the first side stripped, that's the second one stripped. There we go, that one, this one. Move that out of the way. Wonder glue, stick that on there, stick that on there, and then let's tin these cables. So once those have been tinned, we can then bring this closer again, and then what we did before, remember we did the 12 volt and the ground on this. So we are now going to solder these 2 little cables onto this 12 volt and the ground. So that first one is going on right over there, and you want them to be pointing into the middle. You don't want it sticking out. It just makes your bolt quite a lot cleaner if it is pointed to the middle. There we go. So this is what is going to power our flight controller. So on the flight controller, you'll see that the one says bat and the other one says ground. So on the power distribution board, you'll see that the one says 12 volt and the other one says ground. So the one that's G goes to G and the 12 goes to bat. So with that said, let's just hook that in there. It doesn't matter for now. We just want to be able to solder these nicely. Okay. So I'm going to grab that, and then the G goes to G, and the bat goes to bat. And that's it. That's all we need to do. Now before we close up the flight controller, there is one more thing that we need to do, and that is these little pads on the front over here, which we did set up earlier. So it is for the VTX and the camera, and that is these cables that we have over here. This is the VTX cable. This came with your VTX in the box, and this is the camera cable. This also came with your camera in the box. So let's first do the VTX. Now 2 pieces of cable that is really unnecessary is this black and red one. We don't need that at all. So in fact, I'm actually just going to cut that off more or less at that distance because it is useless. We really don't need that. So once it's cut off, we can then grab a piece of heat shrink and then again cut off a tiny bit of heat shrink just to cover that piece of wire that is exposed. Put that right through the heat shrink. Once that's through, grab the soldering iron and then just heat this up quite a bit If you do have a lighter, which I do not have on me right now, you can use a lighter as well. That actually does work really nicely too, but you can just use your soldering iron just to make sure that it shrinks down quite a bit. So once that's done, is you just want to also turn this, make sure it is really nicely turned and tight, and then that also just keeps the build very, very clean. So once that is done, let's cut this off more or less an inch away from the black piece. You might want to keep that. This is a piece that some guys need later on if you want to put on a infrared transmitter. If you're going to be racing, then you might want to keep that. If not, then just put it somewhere that's out of the way. And then the first one that we're going to do is, because these are really small, we don't really have to tin these because there is quite a bit of solder on these pads already. Or actually, as I'm looking at these pads, there's actually not that much. I expected there to be more. So because of that, let's just tin these anyway to make sure that everything is working the way it's supposed to. So that one I made a little bit too long. I'm just going to cut some of those off. With those cut off, let's just tin these. Let me grab this white thing of mine. There we go. It's just at the bottom of you guys' screen. You should be able to see that okay. And then let's just add some solder on these wires. There we go. That's the first one. That's the second one. And that is the last one. So, like I said, this is the VTX cable. And if you'll see on your Maytag Hub OSD, it does say VTX right over there. So the yellow is the signal. So the yellow one we are going to solder on just like that. Okay, let's wait for that to heat up and melt properly. That's the first one. The brown one is ground. So the next one is ground, as you can see right over there. So let's just solder that one on. And then the final one is 5 volt. And all the way on the left, you will see the 5 volt pad. So that one is going to go right there. And that's all that we need for our VTX. That is the VTX connected up. And that's all that we need. The next one is the FPV camera. So this is the cable for the FPV camera. Make this one more or less the same length. So just measure it. That's more or less where it should be. Cut that off. This piece we're probably not going to be using, and we can throw that to the side. And then this camera cable now needs to get soldered onto there. So same thing again, take all of that off, strip it, tin it, and then start the soldering process. So let's tin these. There we go, small one really quickly. Next one really quickly, and the final one really quickly. Okay, so on the Maytag Hub OSD, again, the yellow one goes on where it says cam, because that is where our camera is going to go. So let's solder that cam onto the Hub OSD board. So that's the cam. The black one is the ground. So that ground is going to go right over there on the G. And then the final one is the 5 volt. Now there's only one 5 volt tab for all of these. That is totally fine. So what we're going to do is we're going to solder this along the other one onto the same soldering pad. That is really fine. You don't have to worry about it. You can run both of them from the same pad. Just make sure that both of them are soldered on really nicely. And there we go. That's everything that we need that is now soldered on. And we can just twist all of them to make sure that it is nice and tight. And that is the final cables that we need to solder on to our Hub OSD. So with that said, we can now close our flight controller and move on to the next step. So the flight controller is going to go on just like this. As you can see, it has an arrow pointing to the front. and that is the arrow that you want pointing to the front. This XC60 is the back, and that is what we are going to be doing. So earlier I did cut these already, but forget about those for now. Let me first show you what these are doing. So on the flight controller, you will see that it says number 1, 2, 3, and 4, and that's actually the motor number. So this is motor number 1, motor number 2, motor number 3, and motor number 4. So when we go in the software on the computer later on, that is how the motors are determined. And that is the same on the flight controller 1, 2, 3, 4. And we are going to be soldering that on exactly the same way. So let's start with number 4. Doesn't really matter which one you're going to start with. You see this is way too long. We don't need all of that. We are going to cut this off very quickly, easily, just like that. And then this black and white, we are going to grab that and then just strip this wire off again, the silicon wire. The black and white is actually not silicon wire anymore. This is now PVC, so this is quite a lot stronger, so you might actually have to bite this. So I'm going to take this out of the screen, use my teeth to bite this off. You guys can't see me biting this now, but there we go. Both of them are bit off, and then with both of them being bit off, we can now add the tinning to the cable. So we're going to tin this now. The white one is tinned and the black one is almost tinned. There we go, the black one is tinned, and with that done, we can now attach it to the flight controller. So I'm going to grab my tweezers here, actually move this the other way around because that's easier for me to work with my soldering iron, and then you'll see that there's a black and a white one. The black one is the ground, so that goes on the soldering pad that says G. So we're going to solder this black one onto the G pad. There we go, easy, just like that. And the white one goes on the number 4. And exactly like that. That is our number 4 motor and ESC connected. If all of this had to be connected up now, this is going to be working. The other one's not, because we still need to do those. So I'm just going to skip past this because you guys know how to do this now. And then when I get back, all 4 of them will be wired up. You can pause the video here, do the same, and then when you're done, just carry on again. Alright, so everything has been soldered up now, and that is almost all of the soldering. So the last little bit of soldering that we're going to do now is the receiver. For this specific video, I will be using the FreeSky Tyrannus receiver. If you did opt for the cheaper DXE radio, or if you already have a Spectrum radio, then you will be using more or less the same cable. The only difference is it is yellow, not yellow, it is blue. So it's going to be blue, black, and red. So it doesn't matter though, either one, the yellow or the blue one is the signal, and the red and the black, as per usual, is your power. So again, how we always do this, I am now just taking the little bit of wiring silicon off to expose the wires under it, and then now we are going to tin these. And once these have been tinned, we are going to attach them to the flight controller. So let me just put this on screen for you guys. There we go. And then now the soldering, let's tin them. Alright, so once these have been tinned, we can now solder it onto the flight controller. So like I said, the yellow is for the RX, or if you have blue, that goes onto the RX pad. So that one is on there. The 5 volt is the red one. So red one goes there. And the black one is the ground. So solder that one on there. And there we go. Now once this is on, you just want to twist this a little bit more so that it is a little bit more beautiful. And that is the final piece that we will be doing on the flight controller. Everything is done now, everything is sorted up. The next thing we want to do is attach the flight controller to the board. So we will be screwing this flight controller on now because everything is ready to go. So screw it on. I will just be fast forwarding past this bit of video because you guys don't need to see me screwing this on the whole time. And there we go. Everything is now complete. Let me zoom out a little bit so that you guys can see exactly what we have achieved. Let's zoom out of this. The table is a little bit dirty. You guys will see when you do build this along with me in the video, the table does get really, really dirty really quickly. But there we go. This is our quadcopter and it is basically ready to go. The only thing that's missing now is we just have to plug in the VTX, plug in the camera and see that everything works. So to do that, let's plug in the VTX. So this one goes to the VTX. You remember that little piece on the back there, and this one goes onto the camera. So the camera is on this thing. Remember, that's the first thing that we did, and that is the camera. So if all goes well, this is the moment of truth. This is the moment that everybody is always waiting for. If you are very confident in everything that you did, then everything should work fine. This should light up, these should all light up, the ESC should beep, and everything should be fine. So let's hold thumbs that no white smoke comes out, and the moment of truth. There we go. Everything is working fine. As you can see, that is on there. It's really important to know that you should never power up a VTX without an antenna on it. It will break your VTX. As you can see, the flight controller has a blue LED shining and the camera is most likely working. If you have an FPV goggles lying around, you can tune into this channel to see that your camera is working. And on screen, you should see the hub OSD as well. So with all of that said, the final few things that just remain now is just assembling everything, putting this onto the top plate and then just hiding away the cables nicely, and then also just putting on the battery LiPo strap and a few other things. If you want to go more into detail on how to bind your receiver, there will be a video specifically for your receiver along this series. You can just check on my channel, it should be on there, how to bind a FrSky Tyrannus to your X4R receiver, or how to bind the DXE to your Spectrum receiver. Those videos will be on my channel as well, so don't fret if you don't know what to do with this. And in those videos I will also show you what is the best way to mount your receiver on your quad. So don't worry about that right now. You can get to that piece of the video after this one, after you're done building your entire quadcopter. So just leave this empty for now and let's move on to the next step. So we can unplug this now. We know everything is working fine, no white smoke. If there was any white smoke, I'm really sorry. Then somewhere you messed up your soldering and something shorted out. And yeah, you're gonna have to probably purchase some new parts. Just contact me if that did happen to you and we'll sort you out. We'll figure out exactly what the problem is. No worries. Okay, so let's move on. Let's plug this out and let's plug this out. So with both of these plugged out, we can move that away because we are going to focus only on this for now. So once we have these two, we are now going to want to attach this to our top plate. Now, something that's really nice about the X4R is this hole in the back. So how this VTX works is you'll see there's a little button on it over there, and that is what changes the channel. And this hole in the plate allows you to change the channel while this is mounted onto it. So that is really, really nice. So the first thing that you want to do is, this is also really important, there is current going through this and you don't really want that touching your carbon. Some guys don't mind, I personally do mind, so I just take some double-sided tape, cut off a small piece just like that, and then I just stick it onto this piece that is there, and then that stops it from touching your carbon. Now, like I said, it's really not that necessary to do that, but I do prefer to do that. I really like having it like that. But yeah, just easy, very easy like that. So the next thing we want to do is grab some cable ties, and with these cable ties we are going to now attach this VTX to the frame. So I need 2 cable ties actually to make sure that it does go through. So just slide that through there, tighten it, and then more or less it will start getting shape. And there we go. So I can just tighten these down really, really hard. You want it to be more or less in that position. as you can see over there, and then that allows you to access the button. As you can see, let me grab this to point, that tiny little golden thingy over there, that is the button, and then the channels that you can see, which is really, really nice. I really like that about this frame. Okay, so once those are on, you can just move that up so it's out of the way. Let's grab some more cable ties, and then let's really tie down this antenna and VTX so that it doesn't go anywhere in a gnarly crash. So you can just shove that through the holes on the back of the carbon fiber plate, and then just work your way through it. There we go. And then this one, shove it through there and tighten it down really, really hard. And that's not really going to go anywhere now. See? And then just to play it safe, there's another 2 holes on the back. We can just do that on the 2 holes on the back as well. And there we go. That is your VTX really tightly secured onto your quadcopter. So with all of those on there, you can now cut off these excess pieces of cable tie because we don't need those. It just looks dirty. It'll come in the way of the props. And there we go. That's it. Your VTX is now secured, and we are ready to go to the next step. We can bring back our quad. We can plug in the VTX very easily. Just plug it in there. And then we can plug in our camera. If you are struggling plugging in the camera, you might want to push it through the back like this, and then you can access it really easily through the back. That is also why I didn't put that extra plate of carbon fiber on early in the video. And there we go, that is in. So both of those are connected up now, and we can then finally start closing up our quadcopter. So with these, we can move the cables more or less to the middle, out of the way, and then just slowly start lowering everything down, and just make sure everything clicks into place, especially these front 2. And there we go. That is our top plate now connected to our quadcopter. And with it connected in position, we can now start tying it down with our bolts that we have. So along with the kit, you got those longer ones, and those are the bolts to tie down the standoffs to the bottom of your frame. There we go. Our frame is now attached to the quadcopter, and you basically have a quadcopter that's done now. Everything is good to go. This is a finished quadcopter. The only thing that is now still missing is we want a battery LiPo strap. So let me grab one of those. So this is the battery LiPo strap. It's a luminaire one. You should have gotten one of these in your parcel. And what you want to do first, though, is really important, is all 4 of these bottom ones, which is where your Maytag hub OSD connects to, you want to loosen them quite a bit so that it allows you to shove that LiPo strap under your Maytag hub OSD, because it is a little bit wider than these holes that's in the frame, because this is a stronger strap than the one that is recommended for this frame, because there's a good chance that you will be crashing, so it's good to have a stronger strap. And then once you have it, you will see that there's a hole. Let me just focus for you guys so you can see what's happening here. Zoom in a little bit, focus. You see that there is a hole right between the frame and the Maytag hub OSD. So you want to shove the strap with the Velcro side, not the luminaire side, the Velcro side facing up. So just shove it through the entire way under your Maytag hub OSD until it comes out the other side. Once it's there, you can just grab it, pull it through until it comes onto the side just like that. And then once it's through like that, you can then turn these really tightly again so that your Maytag hub OSD and flight controller is tightly secured in your quad. So that is your battery LiPo strap. You can then just push it through there and clip it back on the top. Let me just focus to the bottom here so you guys can see exactly what I'm doing. and that is your LiPo strap in place. Now, before we finish up this build though, there's one more thing that we need to do, and that is connecting the battery to your quad. And that is very easily done. You can just put your battery like that, strap it down. But the problem is these bolts and things will hurt your battery in a crash. And it's not very secure just having this. So what I like to do is I like to take this double-sided tape and actually put this on my quad, 2 strips of it on the bottom, because it adds a little bit of added protection to your batteries. So just cut that off there, add another one on here, right up against it, cut it off on the end again, right over there. Oh, that wasn't done so neatly, let's just redo that. Okay, more or less like that, and then just make sure those two are stuck down to the bottom really nicely. So we can peel off this blue to reveal the other sticky side. Both of those are sticky sides now. And then what I would like to do is I like to grab a piece of Velcro. So this is Velcro that I have on my quad, which then connects to the Velcro that I have on my battery. So the battery actually sticks onto the quad as well. So when you crash it, there's a good chance that your battery will still stay on the quad. So let me zoom out a little bit more here so you guys can see exactly what I'm doing, because it is very zoomed in. Then just strap that around, strap that tightly on there, and that is how I strap my battery to the quad. And then that's it. Everything is basically ready to go. Then we can power it up just to make sure everything is working again. You can see the lights through the top here that I said for your VTX, that's working perfectly. And we can finally install this extra piece of carbon fiber plate that closes up the back, which your GoPro gets mounted on. We can install that onto the frame. That just takes a little bit of force to get pushed in there, but you can just shove it in, and that closes up the back of the frame. And then the final thing we need to do is just add propellers. Then our quad is basically done and ready to go. The only thing then after that is, we need to set it up on the computer to just make sure that everything is calibrated correctly, but that is a whole nother video, and that video should follow after this one. So if you did watch this whole video and you built your first quad, congratulations. That is a really, really big milestone in this hobby. And if this is your first time getting into FPV and you built your quad, this is the right way to do it. You can be proud of yourself. Not many people can build a quadcopter like this. It's not easy, but it is very rewarding once you are done with the entire quad. So that's it. This is our quad that is complete. Let me zoom out all the way, put it here in the middle, and we now have a completed FPV quadcopter. Everything is ready to go, everything works fine. Now, like I said, it's just the final few tweaks that we need to make sure that everything works perfectly fine. But that is our quadcopter.